Between May and June of 1944, an SS officer named Bernhard Walter captured something that the Nazi regime never wanted the entire world to see. His camera documented every single step of the industrial death process at Auschwitz-Birkenau. The photographs show arriving trains, families being separated, endless lines walking toward the deadly gas chambers. Why exactly would Nazis document their very own crimes? What dark secrets do these images reveal about the innermost workings of the extermination machine? The answers to these questions take us to a place where more than 1,100,000 people died in less than 5 years. A place where the word selection meant immediate life or death. A place whose name would become synonymous with absolute horror. Auschwitz. But the history of Auschwitz does not begin with the gas chambers, nor with the smoking chimneys of the crematoriums. It begins with an apparently administrative decision taken in April 1940 in a Berlin office. Heinrich Himmler, commander of the SS, signs an order that will change the course of history. The order establishes the construction of a concentration camp in a small Polish city called Auschwitz, renamed by the German occupiers as Auschwitz. Why that place specifically? The answer reveals the chilling logic behind the choice. Auschwitz was located at the confluence of important railway lines. It was far enough from the large urban centres to keep the operation secret, but accessible enough to receive massive deportations from all over Europe. The Polish city, situated approximately 50 kilometres southwest of Krakow, would go from being a quiet place to becoming the epicentre of the most systematic genocide in modern history. The person designated to materialise this sinister vision was an SS officer, whose ordinary appearance hid an extraordinary capacity for systematic cruelty. His name, Rudolf Höss. When Rudolf Höss arrived at Auschwitz in April 1940, he found abandoned military buildings, empty stables and swampy terrain. It did not look like the setting of what would become the deadliest extermination camp ever built. But Höss saw potential where others only found desolation. Born in 1900 in the German Black Forest, Höss grew up in a strict Catholic family, where obedience was the supreme value. His father constantly insisted on absolute discipline, an education that moulded the future commander in ways that no one could have anticipated. During the First World War, he became one of the youngest non-commissioned officers in the German army. The German defeat in 1918 left him devastated, feeling betrayed by a government that, in his distorted vision of the world, had capitulated to Germany's enemies. In 1923, his life took a violent turn when he murdered his former teacher, Walter Kadow. The motive? Kadow had denounced a fellow member of the Freikorps, the far-right paramilitary groups that sowed violence in post-war Germany. For this crime, Höss was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Released early in 1928, he seemed to seek a different life. He joined an agricultural community, married, established a farm. But in 1934, Heinrich Himmler recruited him for the SS. Höss accepted without hesitation. His first assignment, the Dachau concentration camp. Dachau would become the University of Genocide for Höss. There, under the tutelage of Theodor Eicke, the first commander of the camp, Höss learned to transform Nazi hate into efficient systems of oppression. Eicke developed the model that would be replicated in all subsequent camps. A brutal hierarchy where the SS guards maintained absolute control. The prisoners were stripped of their humanity, and violence functioned as a daily management tool. The Dachau regime operated on a simple but devastating principle, breaking the human will through the combination of physical abuse, psychological torture, and constant degradation. The prisoners lived under regular inspections, where any minimal irregularity, a stain on the uniform, a badly made fold in the blanket, could result in severe punishments. The guards invented infractions when they did not find them, creating a climate of perpetual anxiety where the prisoners never knew when they would be beaten or punished. Höss absorbed these lessons with bureaucratic efficiency. He observed how the system of Karpos, prisoners selected to supervise their companions, worked, creating internal divisions and facilitating control. He studied the methods of punishment, public beatings, solitary confinement, meaningless grueling labour designed solely to humiliate and exhaust. He learned that the key was not just physical violence, but psychological destruction. The most disturbing thing about Höss was his ability to rationalise this cruelty. In his later writings, he would describe his work in Dachau with the cold language of an efficient administrator, referring to procedures and protocols as if he were managing a factory and not supervising systematic human suffering. This emotional disconnection, this capacity to see prisoners as logistical problems instead of people, prepared him perfectly for his future role in Auschwitz. In 1938, Höss was transferred to Sachsenhausen, another camp where he continued perfecting his administrative skills. By 1940, when Himmler was looking for someone to establish the new camp in occupied Poland, Höss was the obvious choice. An SS officer with years of experience in camp management, proven loyalty to the regime, and most importantly, an absolute lack of moral scruples. When Höss arrived at Auschwitz in April 1940, his first task was monumental: to build a concentration camp from scratch, with limited resources and under constant pressure from his superiors to complete the work quickly. The solution he implemented revealed the ruthless nature of the whole project from its beginnings. On June 14, 1940, a group of 728 Polish political prisoners was transported from the Tarnow prison. These would be the first official inmates of Auschwitz, registered with numbers 31 to 758. But even before their arrival, 30 German prisoners transferred from Sachsenhausen were already on site. Their job, to build the camp that would imprison them. Conditions were brutal from the beginning. The prisoners worked day and night, carrying heavy materials without proper equipment. Tools were scarce. Machines were conspicuous by their absence. If the work did not advance quickly enough, the SS guards did not hesitate to beat the exhausted workers. The lack of resources did not stop the SS. They simply transferred the cost to the most vulnerable victims. Höss's solution to the problem of construction materials was particularly cruel. He ordered the demolition of Polish homes in the vicinity. The prisoners were sent to destroy the houses of families that had been expelled, extracting bricks, wood, boards, any useful material. While the Polish owners watched helplessly the destruction of their homes, the materials were transported to the campsite. The houses where generations had lived became the barracks that would imprison thousands. This pattern, using the victims to build the instruments of their own oppression, would be constantly repeated in Auschwitz. It was an additional calculated cruelty. The prisoners would not only suffer in the camp, but they would build with their own hands the place of their suffering. By the end of 1940, the basic structure of the camp was taking shape. Red brick barracks lined up in neat rows. Electrified barbed wire surrounded the perimeter. Watchtowers rose at the corners, ensuring that no movement went unnoticed. The main entrance flaunted the words that would become infamous: Arbeit macht frei, work makes you free, a cruel lie engraved in wrought iron. The first prisoners were mainly Poles, intellectuals, resistance activists, members of the Polish elite whom the Nazis saw as threats to their occupation. The SS applied the Dachau model: brutal discipline, arbitrary punishments, grueling work. But this was only the beginning. In March 1941, the camp housed 10,900 prisoners. That number seemed enormous then. Soon it would become insignificant. From the outside, Block 11 looked identical to any other building in the camp, a 2-story red brick structure, with regular windows and a discreet door. But the prisoners knew it was different. Block 11 was where you disappeared. It was where you screamed. It was where if you returned, and most did not return, you came back changed forever. What happened inside that seemingly ordinary building? Block 11 served as a prison within the prison, a special punishment place for those accused of serious infractions, or for those the SS wanted to interrogate. The basement contained punishment cells where the torture methods varied according to the cruel imagination of the guards. Some prisoners were hung from ceiling beams, with their hands tied behind their backs, dislocating their shoulders, while the weight of their own body increased the pain. Others were forced to remain in standing cells, spaces so narrow that they could not sit or lie down, for days. Starvation cells condemned prisoners to die slowly of inanition. SS officer Max Grabner supervised these operations with bureaucratic efficiency. Born in 1905 in Vienna to a humble family, Grabner had worked as a herdsman before joining the SS in 1938. His rise was rapid. By 1940, he was one of the most feared officers in Auschwitz. Every week, Grabner reviewed reports on prisoner infractions and decided who would live and who would die. His decisions were arbitrary, based on moods rather than evidence. A prisoner could be executed for a rumour, an unfounded accusation, simply for being on the wrong list at the wrong time. The executions were carried out in the courtyard between Block 10 and Block 11, a space isolated from the rest of the camp by a high brick wall. The condemned prisoners were taken there, often without knowing exactly what awaited them until the last moment. The wall at the back of the courtyard, far from the entrance, became the execution site. The SS executioners shot the victims in the back of the neck with small caliber weapons. The bodies fell. Other prisoners were forced to clean the blood and transport the corpses. The cycle repeated. The exact records were lost or destroyed, but the testimonies of survivors paint a terrifying picture. Block 11 was not an anomaly in Auschwitz. It was the dark heart of the system, the place where the rules were applied with maximum brutality, where the regime demonstrated that human life was worth nothing. The survivors who passed through Block 11 came out with visible physical injuries, fractured bones, permanent scars, damage to internal organs. But the psychological wounds were worse. Some lost their sight due to repeated blows to the head. Others never recovered the full use of their limbs. Many simply never spoke again about what they had experienced there, carrying their traumas in silence to the grave. Block 11 would also later serve as the place where the first experiments with Zyklon B would be carried out, the gas that would transform Auschwitz from a brutal concentration camp to an industrial death factory. But that transformation was still to come. The SS did not run Auschwitz alone. To maintain control over thousands of prisoners with relatively few guards, they implemented an ingenious and perverse system, the kapos. A capo was a prisoner selected by the SS to supervise other prisoners. Officially, their role was to ensure that work was done efficiently, maintain order in the barracks, supervise the work commandos. In practice, the kapos functioned as an intermediate layer of oppression, allowing the SS to delegate daily violence while maintaining ultimate control. How did someone become a capo? The SS generally selected German criminals, prisoners transferred from other camps for common crimes for these roles. The logic was simple. These individuals had already demonstrated a disposition to violence and lacked solidarity with the political or racially persecuted prisoners who made up the majority of the camp's population. The SS offered them privileges, extra food rations, better housing conditions, cigarettes, occasionally better clothing. In exchange, the kapos were expected to be brutal with their fellow prisoners. The system created a toxic hierarchy. The kapos faced constant pressure from the SS. If their block or commando did not meet the work quotas, if the prisoners under their supervision seemed too slow, if anything went wrong, the capo was responsible. To protect their privileges and avoid being returned to the general prison population, which often amounted to a death sentence, many capos became extremely cruel. Ernst Kramer exemplified this type of capo. Arriving at Auschwitz in August 1940 as part of the second group of German criminals transferred from Sachsenhausen, Kramer quickly established himself as one of the most sadistic capos in the camp. His imposing physical size, a large and strong individual, allowed him to easily intimidate the malnourished prisoners under his supervision. He directed the penal commando, groups of prisoners assigned to the hardest jobs as additional punishment. One of Kramer's cruelest routines involved a giant roller used to flatten the ground of the roll call courtyard. The roller was so heavy that approximately 20 prisoners were needed to pull it. Kramer would sit on top of the roller, adding his considerable weight to the load while holding a whip. He shouted orders for the prisoners to run faster, beating them mercilessly if the pace slowed. The exhausted, malnourished prisoners, with barely enough strength to walk, were forced to run pulling this impossible load. One night, according to testimonies, one of the prisoners collapsed. He fell to his knees, unable to get up, unable to continue. Kramer ordered the rest of the commando to keep pulling the roller, directly over their fallen companion. The other prisoners, terrified of becoming the next victim, obeyed. The roller crushed the prostrate prisoner. The SS not only tolerated this brutality, they rewarded it. Capos like Kramer received extra portions of soup, an invaluable luxury in a place where starvation was constant. They received larger pieces of bread, cigarettes, which functioned as currency in the camp's underground economy, superior clothing and footwear, giving them an appearance of authority and power. This system was diabolically effective. The SS kept their hands relatively clean while the daily violence was executed by other prisoners. The capos, to maintain their privileges, became increasingly brutal. Ordinary prisoners faced not only the oppression of their German captors, but also of their own companions. Solidarity was fragmented, trust was eroded. The system designed its own perpetuation. However, not all capos were monsters. Some used their position to subtly help other prisoners when they could, slipping extra food, warning about upcoming inspections, protecting the most vulnerable from the worst abuses. These acts of silent resistance were risky. If the SS discovered a capo showing weakness, the punishment was immediate and severe. But their existence proved that even in the most dehumanizing system, some individuals found ways to maintain their humanity. By mid-1942, Auschwitz had evolved dramatically from its initial days as a concentration camp for Polish political prisoners. Trains arrived regularly, loaded with deportees from all over occupied Europe. The arrival at Auschwitz followed a ritual designed to disorient, humiliate, and destroy personal identity from the very first moment. The prisoners descended from the cattle cars after journeys that lasted days, sometimes weeks. They were confused, exhausted, thirsty, hungry. Many were sick. Some had already died during the transport. They did not know where they were. They did not understand what awaited them. The SS guards shouted orders in German, beating those who did not move fast enough, separating families immediately. Those selected to enter the camp, a minority, the majority was sent directly to the gas chambers, were directed to a reception centre. There began the process of systematic depersonalisation. First, they were stripped of all their possessions, clothes, shoes, jewellery, photographs, letters, any personal object they had managed to bring. Everything was confiscated, classified, stored or stolen by SS personnel. The prisoners lost their last physical connections with their previous lives, with their identities, with their families. Then came the tattoo ritual. Auschwitz was the only concentration camp where all admitted prisoners were tattooed with an identification number. The first to receive this treatment were Soviet prisoners of war in 1941. Initially, the numbers were pierced into the chest using long needles, an extremely painful process. The open wound was then filled with ink. Later, the procedure was standardized. The number was tattooed on the left forearm. This tattoo served multiple practical purposes for the SS. It facilitated the rapid identification of prisoners, especially of corpses, when massive deaths made it impossible to keep detailed records of all the deceased. But the tattoo also fulfilled a more sinister psychological function. It permanently marked the victims, transforming them from individuals with names and histories into numbers in a bureaucratic system of oppression. The prisoners received striped uniforms after the tattoo. The uniform was invariably the wrong size, too big or too small, another deliberate humiliation. They also received a fabric triangle that they had to sew onto the uniform, indicating the category of their imprisonment. Jews wore 2 superimposed yellow triangles, forming a Star of David. Political prisoners received red triangles. Asocials, a broad category that included homeless people, alcoholics, anyone the Nazi authorities considered socially undesirable, wore black triangles. Jehovah's Witnesses, arrested for refusing to serve in the army or salute the Nazi flag, received purple triangles. Common criminals had green triangles. Homosexuals, pink triangles. Romani gypsies, brown triangles. This classification created additional hierarchies within the camp. Political prisoners generally received better treatment than other groups. Jews occupied the lowest level in this perverse hierarchy, subjected to the worst abuses, the scarcest rations, the most dangerous jobs. After receiving their uniform and their identifying triangle, the prisoners were assigned to barracks. The search for a bunk was an immediate struggle. The available beds were only empty because their previous occupants had died. Most newcomers did not find a bunk. They slept on the cold stone floor, huddled against each other to share warmth. Every night, all prisoners had to present themselves at the Appelplatz, the roll call courtyard, to be counted. This ritual could last hours, especially if there was any discrepancy in the count, or if the SS decided to use it as an opportunity for additional punishments. The prisoners remained standing, regardless of the weather, rain, snow, extreme heat, until the SS were satisfied. The sick collapsed, the weak died standing, but the roll call continued. The answer was simple and complex simultaneously. You needed luck to avoid being selected for the gas chamber, not to contract deadly diseases, not to cross paths with a particularly sadistic guard on a bad day. You needed resources, extra food, warmer clothing, connections with other prisoners who could help you. You needed the will to live, even when each day erased a little more of your humanity. But above all, you needed time to pass quickly, because as long as you remained in Auschwitz, every day could be your last. In May 1941, while Auschwitz continued expanding it as a concentration camp, a German chemical corporation was looking for a site to build a new factory. IG Farben, one of the largest companies in Germany, needed to produce synthetic rubber, Bühne, and fuel to support the Nazi war efforts. Dr. Otto Ambros, a senior executive of the company, had been studying maps of occupied Poland, looking for a location that met certain requirements: access to coal, abundant water, developed transport infrastructure. He finally found the perfect place, approximately 5 kilometers east of Auschwitz. Initially, the proximity to the concentration camp was not a determining factor in the decision. IG Farben planned to hire ethnic German workers who were being resettled in the region. But there was a problem. Most able-bodied German workers were being sent to the war front. Labour was scarce. Then Ambros had an idea. Why not use the prisoners from the nearby camp? Heinrich Himmler visited Auschwitz in March 1941 and announced that the camp would expand to house 30,000 inmates instead of the current 10,000. He proposed a deal to IG Farben. If the company helped build new barracks and provided materials, Auschwitz could supply workers for the factory. For Hoss, this represented an opportunity to grow his camp and increase its importance within the concentration camp system. For IG Farben, it meant access to free and virtually unlimited labour. The agreement between Himmler and IG Farben fundamentally changed the nature of Auschwitz. The camp would no longer be simply a place of detention and punishment. It would transform into a factory where prisoners would be exploited to death. IG Farben executives visited the camp regularly, negotiated with Hoss over how many workers they needed, inspected the quality of the slave labour, as if they were evaluating machinery. The prisoners assigned to the construction of the Bühne plant, which would eventually become known as Auschwitz, Free or Monowitz, faced particularly brutal conditions. They walked several kilometers to the construction site every morning, worked grueling 12-hour shifts, moving heavy materials, digging foundations, building structures, all while receiving starvation rations. IG Farben's civilian foremen beat slow workers. SS guards shot those who collapsed from exhaustion. The life expectancy of a prisoner assigned to Buna was approximately 3 months. But IG Farben's involvement in Auschwitz extended beyond labour exploitation. The company also produced something that would transform Auschwitz from a brutal concentration camp into the epicentre of industrial genocide. Zyklon B, a pesticide based on hydrocyanic acid, originally developed for fumigations, small pellets that, upon contact with air, released lethal gas. September 1941. Hoss receives information about a gas used to kill insect pests in the camp's warehouses. It is called Zyklon B. It is effective, fast, relatively cheap. An idea begins to form in his mind. If this gas kills insects so efficiently, could it be used to kill people? Hoss orders an experiment. The place. The basement of Block 11, that torture building the prisoners feared so much. The exact date remains uncertain. Some testimonies suggest early September, others late in the month. The victims, approximately 600 Soviet prisoners of war and 250 sick Polish prisoners, considered useless by the SS. The prisoners are pushed into the basement. The doors are hermetically sealed. SS guards, wearing gas masks, pour the Zyklon B crystals through openings in the ceiling. The pellets fall. Upon contact with the air, they begin to release cyanide gas. How long did they take to die? SS records indicated approximately 20 minutes. 20 minutes of agony while the poisonous gas penetrated their lungs, blocked the oxygen in their cells, caused convulsions, asphyxia, death. When the SS opened the doors hours later, they found bodies piled up near the entrance. The victims had desperately tried to escape. Some showed signs of having scratched the concrete walls with their fingernails until they bled. Hoss considered the experiment a resounding success. Because it did not require the guards to look their victims in the eyes. Because it was efficient, they could kill hundreds simultaneously. Because the process could be industrialized, scaled, perfected. In his memoirs written while awaiting execution after the war, Hoss would explain with chilling coldness, "This gassing set my mind at rest, for the mass extermination of the Jews was to start soon, and neither Eichmann nor I was certain as to how these mass killings were to be carried out. Now we had the gas, and we had established a procedure." That clinical description, the gas and the procedure, reveals the bureaucratic mentality behind the genocide. Hoss did not speak of mass murder. He spoke of procedures. He did not discuss human victims. He evaluated operational efficiency. But the original Auschwitz camp, although expanded, could not handle the scale of extermination the Nazis planned. In October 1941, while the Zyklon B experiment demonstrated its horrific effectiveness, Himmler ordered the construction of a second massive camp, approximately 3 kilometers west of Auschwitz I. The chosen site was a swampy area called Brzezinka by the local Poles, Birkenau in German. The terrain was terrible for construction, wet, muddy, prone to flooding. The sanitary conditions would be nightmares. Diseases would spread rapidly. Did that matter to the Nazi planners? No. Because Birkenau was not designed to sustain human life, it was designed to destroy it. SS Captain Karl Bischoff and architect Fritz Ertl received the task of designing the new camp. Their initial plan envisioned barracks that would house 550 prisoners each. For comparison, in Dachau, which was already notoriously brutal, similar barracks contained a maximum of 200 people. Birkenau's planners deliberately tripled that density. Construction began in October 1941. Who built Birkenau? The prisoners themselves. 10,000 Soviet prisoners of war, were forced to work in the swampy terrain, digging foundations, erecting structures, installing barbed wire. They received no proper tools. The food rations were insufficient even for sedentary work, much less for strenuous physical labour. They worked under the constant surveillance of armed guards, ready to shoot at any sign of resistance or slowness. By the spring of 1942, only a few hundred of those 10,000 Soviet prisoners were still alive. The rest had died of starvation, exhaustion, disease, or had been executed. Their bodies literally built Birkenau. Their bones lay under the foundations. Their blood mixed with the mud of the swampy terrain. As Birkenau took shape, its purpose evolved. Originally conceived as a prisoner of war camp, it transformed into something much more sinister, when the final solution, the Nazi plan to exterminate all of the Jews of Europe, was formalized at the Wannsee Conference in January 1942. Birkenau would become the primary extermination center of the Nazi system. It would eventually house up to 90,000 prisoners simultaneously. More than 1 million people would die there, the majority Jews deported from all over occupied Europe. While Birkenau was being built, Höss needed more permanent gassing facilities than the makeshift basement of Block 11. His solution: 2 abandoned brick houses near the Birkenau site, houses that had belonged to Polish families expelled by the German occupation. The first house, known as the Little Red House, or Bunker 1, was converted into a gas chamber in March 1942. The windows were bricked up. The rooms were hermetically sealed. Signs on the doors read "Zur Desinfektion," for disinfection, perpetuating the lie that the prisoners were going to be disinfected, not murdered. The first transport of Jews gassed in Birkenau arrived in March 1942, a group of Polish Jewish families deported from Upper Silesia. They were led directly from the unloading ramp to the Little Red House. The SS told them to shower after the journey. The victims entered, not knowing what awaited them. The doors were sealed. The Zyklon B was introduced through openings in the ceiling. In June 1942, a second house, the Little White House, or Bunker 2, was converted and put into operation, doubling the gassing capacity. Bunker 1 had a capacity for approximately 800 people. Bunker 2 could hold up to 1,200. The SS carried out multiple daily gassings when transports arrived in large numbers. The bodies were initially buried in massive mass graves in nearby meadows, but this method soon proved problematic. The groundwater from the swampy terrain contaminated the area. The smell of decomposition was unbearable. The bodies, swollen by putrefaction gases, began to break the surface of the soil. In September 1942, Höss ordered the exhumation of all buried corpses and their cremation. Prisoners of the Sonderkommando, special squads of prisoners forced to work in the extermination operations, dug the graves, extracted tens of thousands of decomposing bodies, and burned them on enormous open-air pyres. It was psychologically devastating work. Many members of the Sonderkommando recognized relatives among the corpses they had to handle. But even open-air cremation was insufficient for the scale of extermination the Nazis planned. They needed something more efficient, more discreet, more industrial. Between 1942 and 1943, 4 large crematorium complexes were built in Birkenau. They were not simple ovens. They were integrated facilities designed specifically for efficient mass murder. Gas chambers disguised as showers in the basements, ventilation systems to extract the gas after each gassing, freight elevators to transport corpses to the ovens on upper floors, multiple crematorium ovens operating simultaneously. The design of these crematoriums reveals the collaboration between architects, engineers and private German companies in the genocide. The company Topf und Cerner from Erfurt designed and built the crematorium ovens, even patenting improvements in cremation efficiency. Engineers visited Birkenau regularly to supervise the installation and solve technical problems. Preserved correspondence shows bureaucratic discussions about costs, hourly cremation capacity, fuel efficiency, Technical conversations about industrial murder. Crematoriums 2 and 3, the largest, entered into operation in March and June 1943 respectively. Each contained an underground gas chamber with a capacity for approximately 1,000 people and 5 crematorium ovens with 3 chambers each. Crematoriums 4 and 5, operational since March and April 1943, were smaller but could still gas hundreds of people simultaneously. The theoretical capacity of the 4 crematoriums combined was approximately 4,400 bodies per day. In practice, during the peak of the extermination of Hungarian Jews in May to July 1944, the SS pushed the system beyond its limits, burning corpses on additional open-air pyres to keep pace with the massive gassings. By mid-1944, Auschwitz-Birkenau functioned as a brutally efficient death machine. Trains arrived directly at a ramp inside the camp, the infamous Oden-Rampe, Jewish ramp, and after May 1944, a new ramp built directly in front of the entrance to Birkenau. The train cars stopped. The doors opened violently. SS guards shouted orders in German: Raus, raus, schnell, out, out, fast. Dogs barked. The deportees, disoriented after days in cattle cars, without proper food, water or sanitation, descended into a scene of controlled chaos. Families were separated immediately. Men to the left, women and children to the right. SS medical officers, standing on the ramp, conducted the selection, a process that determined destinies in seconds. A gesture with the cane or finger. Left, right. Temporary life, immediate death. The criteria: age, physical appearance, apparent ability to work. The elderly, straight to the gas chambers. Young children, to the gas chambers. Unless they were twins. More on that in a moment. Pregnant women or women with babies. Gas chambers. Visibly sick or weak people, gas chambers. Approximately 70 to 80% of each transport was sent immediately to death, without even being registered as prisoners. They simply arrived and disappeared, as if they had never existed. The 20 to 30% considered fit for work, mainly apparently healthy young adults, was sent to the registration process. Tattooing, confiscation of possessions, assignment of uniforms, introduction to the hell that would be their existence until they died of exhaustion, disease, or were themselves selected for the gas chambers. Officially, any SS doctor could do it. But one name stands out above all others: an individual whose actions on the ramp and in his medical laboratories would make him a symbol of Nazi scientific depravity. Dr. Josef Mengele. Josef Mengele arrived at Auschwitz in May 1943, just as the new crematoriums entered full operation. Before Auschwitz, he had served on the Eastern Front, where he was wounded and decorated for bravery. He was a qualified doctor with doctorates in anthropology and medicine. He came from a prosperous family in Bavaria. On the surface, he seemed a respectable professional. But in Auschwitz, Mengele found the perfect laboratory for his pseudoscientific experiments. He had unlimited access to subjects, prisoners who could not consent, who could not resist, whose lives were worth nothing to their captors. He could experiment without ethical restrictions, without supervision, without consequences. His particular obsession, twins. When Mengele was present during the selections on the ramp, he specifically looked for twins. Zwillinge, Zwillinge. Twins, twins, he shouted, scanning the crowds of terrified deportees. If he identified twins, especially identical twins, he separated them immediately, giving strict orders that no one touched them except him. The twins received special treatment compared to other prisoners, slightly better rations, housing in specific barracks, temporary protection from regular selections. Mengele even brought them chocolate occasionally, played with the children, feigned kindness. Because Mengele saw them as valuable research specimens, he was obsessed with genetics, with understanding the mechanisms of heredity, with the Nazi idea of improving the Aryan race through genetic engineering. His experiments were brutal and scientifically useless. He injected chemicals into the eyes of twins trying to change their colour. He amputated limbs without anesthesia. He performed blood transfusions between twins to observe reactions. He deliberately infected one of the twins with diseases to compare progressions. In the most macabre case, he simultaneously killed both twins, performed detailed comparative autopsies, dissecting organs, measuring every body dimension, looking for differences or similarities that could reveal genetic secrets. Most of his research subjects died during or after the experiments. Those who survived were left physically and psychologically shattered. Some survivors of his experiments would remember decades later how Mengele spoke kindly to them before injecting painful substances, how he whistled operatic melodies while performing sadistic procedures, how he maintained a facade of medical professionalism while committing atrocities. Mengele also experimented with dwarves, people with physical differences, individuals with rare genetic conditions. Anything he considered interesting from a racial research perspective became a target. After the war, he escaped to South America, where he lived under false identities until his death by drowning in Brazil in 1979. He never faced trial for his crimes. The victims of his experiments, who survived, carried the scars, physical and psychological, for the rest of their lives. For those selected immediately for the gas chambers, the majority of each transport, the process was designed to minimize panic and resistance through systematic deception. After descending from the trains, the victims selected for immediate death were directed toward the crematoriums. The SS maintained the fiction until the last possible moment. They told the victims that they would shower and disinfect after the long journey. They pointed to the crematorium buildings, referring to them as baths. The victims descended stairs to the basement of crematorium 2 or 3, or entered the ground-level gas chambers in crematoriums 4 and 5. The interior design reinforced the lie. Hooks on the walls to hang clothes, wooden benches, instructions in multiple languages about disinfection procedures. The SS ordered everyone to undress completely, promising that they would recover their belongings after the shower. Mothers calmed frightened children. The elderly helped each other undress. Families stayed together, believing they would soon be reunited after a necessary shower. Then the steel doors closed. They were sealed hermetically. On the roof of the gas chambers, there were covered openings. The SS guards climbed to the roof, opened the covers, poured Zyklon B crystals through wire columns that descended into the chamber. The crystals fell. The gas began to be released. The victims probably took seconds to realize that something was terribly wrong. The gas irritated throats and lungs immediately. People began to cough, to scream, to push towards the sealed doors. Absolute panic. Death was not instantaneous. Testimonies of Sonderkommando members, prisoners forced to work in the crematoriums, described that the process lasted approximately 15 to 20 minutes. 15 to 20 minutes of agony as the victims suffocated. Their nervous systems collapsed. Their hearts stopped. The bodies remained piled up near the doors, the last positions of people desperately trying to escape. Parents hugging children, couples intertwined, the physical evidence of the most terrible moment imaginable. After approximately half an hour, the SS ventilated the chambers using mechanical systems installed specifically for that purpose. Then the Sonderkommando entered, initially using gas masks, until the gas concentration dropped to tolerable levels. Their job: separate the intertwined bodies, cut their hair, which was sold to German companies to make textiles, extract gold teeth, look for jewelry or hidden money in body cavities, transport the corpses to the freight elevators that took them to the crematorium ovens. The members of the Sonderkommando faced the most devastating moral dilemma. They participated in the murder of their own people to survive a few more months. They frequently recognized relatives, friends, neighbors among the corpses they handled. The psychological trauma was indescribable. The SS knew that the Sonderkommando possessed knowledge that was too dangerous, direct testimony of the extermination process. For that reason, the SS periodically selected the entire Sonderkommando for the gas chambers, replacing them with new prisoners who then faced the same fate months later. Despite this, some members of the Sonderkommando performed extraordinary acts of resistance and documentation. They buried written testimonies in the ground near the crematoriums. They secretly photographed the extermination operations, images that are some of the few direct photographic evidences of the gassings. They participated in an armed revolt in October 1944, destroying Crematorium 4, although the majority died in the attempt. The possessions of the victims, suitcases, clothes, shoes, jewellery, photographs, personal objects of all kinds, were systematically confiscated. This massive looting was organised in an area of the camp known among the prisoners as Canada, supposedly because Canada represented wealth and abundance in the European imagination of that time. Teams of prisoners sorted mountains of belongings. Clothing was sent to Germany to be distributed to civilians after Allied bombings. Jewellery and valuables were melted down or sent to the German central bank. Personal documents, photographs, letters, diaries were simply burned. Entire lives reduced to sortable merchandise. When the SS evacuated Auschwitz in January 1945, they tried to destroy evidence, but they did not complete the job. Soviet soldiers found massive warehouses still full of belongings: 348,000 men's suits, 836,000 women's dresses, enormous amounts of shoes, including 7,000 kilograms of human hair packed ready for shipment to German textile factories. Every object represented a life. Every suitcase had a name written on it, evidence of the Nazi deception that had instructed victims to tag their belongings, to recover them after disinfection. For those initially selected to work instead of immediate death, life in Auschwitz was a constant struggle for survival in conditions deliberately designed to kill. Food rations were absolutely insufficient. In the morning, a dark liquid called coffee, although it contained no real coffee, only tinted water. At noon, a litre of watery soup, occasionally with a few pieces of rotten vegetables or potatoes. At night, a piece of black bread, approximately 300 grams, sometimes with a small amount of margarine or terrible quality sausage. These rations provided approximately 1,300 to 1,700 daily calories. The prisoners performed grueling physical labour that required 3,000 to 4,000 daily calories. The difference was made up by the body consuming its own reserves, first fat, then muscle, finally internal organs. The prisoners literally became living skeletons, a process the Nazis clinically called Muselmann. The barracks were overcrowded nightmares. Structures originally designed as stables for 52 horses housed 400 to 500 prisoners. Wooden bunks were shared by 6 to 8 people. There were no real mattresses, only lice-infested straw. Blankets were scarce. During the Polish winter, with temperatures dropping to -20 degrees Celsius, the prisoners huddled against each other, desperately trying to share body heat. Sanitary conditions were catastrophic. The latrines consisted of long boards, with holes over open pits. Prisoners could only use them twice a day during specific periods, morning and night, regardless of physiological needs. Many suffered dysentery due to malnutrition and contaminated water, making this restriction torturous. Some prisoners literally died in the latrines, too weak to get up. Parasite infestations were universal. Lice, fleas, rats proliferated in the unhygienic conditions. The lice were not just annoying, they transmitted typhus, a frequently fatal disease that caused periodic epidemics in the camp. Prisoners infected with typhus were generally selected for the gas chambers as a disease control measure. Forced labour exhausted the prisoners to death, literally. Some were assigned to quarries, breaking stones under brutal supervision. Others worked in construction, carrying heavy materials without proper equipment. Thousands were sent to the IG Farben Bühne plant, Where conditions were particularly deadly, civilian foremen and SS guards competed in cruelty, beating slow workers, denying breaks, forcing inhuman rhythms. In a building separated from the camp's main archives, the Germans stored something extraordinary: the complete architectural plans of Auschwitz. Hundreds of detailed technical drawings showed every building, every installation, every system. When the Red Army arrived in January 1945, the SS had burned most of the camp's records, victim lists, deportation orders, documentation of the murders, but they forgot the construction archives. What do these plans reveal? The documents showed that the construction of Auschwitz was not improvised or accidental. It was a massive engineering project that lasted years and involved dozens of companies, architects, engineers, civilian contractors. The plans include detailed diagrams of the gas chambers, technical specifications of the crematoriums, ventilation systems specifically designed to extract poisonous gas after each mass murder. These documents are extraordinary because from no other extermination camp did so much technical documentation survive. The plans of Auschwitz constitute irrefutable evidence of how a major architectural project served as a central tool of the Nazi extermination policy. The drawings were produced by SS draftsmen, by prisoners with technical training employed in the planning offices, and by hired civilian draftsmen. Companies submitted projects, negotiated contracts, executed constructions. Everything followed normal bureaucratic procedures, except that the final product was a factory to murder human beings. On October 1st, 1941, the Central Construction Authority of the Waffen SS and Police, Auschwitz, Upper Silesia, was established, directed by Sturmbannführer Major Karl Bischoff. The Plans Office, headed by Hauptscharführer First Sergeant Major Wichmann, was responsible for preparing all construction designs. Herta Soswinski, a prisoner who worked as a clerk in the construction authority, would remember after the war, the task of the Bauleitung construction authority was the general planning of all the construction works within Auschwitz, including housing, medical facilities, crematoriums, gas chambers. The Bauleitung was not only responsible for the planning, but also for the work itself, the allocation of materials and supervision. The SS members who worked on the plans were also active at the construction sites when necessary. Can you imagine that? Professional architects and engineers meticulously drawing plans for gas chambers, calculating capacities, optimizing victim flows, specifying ventilation systems to accelerate the removal of corpses, all with the technical precision of any other construction project. The Birkenau camp was built on swampy and exposed terrain. The construction was carried out in stages, with the ultimate goal of accommodating approximately 200,000 prisoners. Why choose swampy terrain when dry land was available? Alfred Czeslaw Przybyłski, a Polish prisoner who worked in construction, provided a chilling answer. During the excavation and construction of the foundations, the prisoners worked in autumn, in winter, and in frosts, standing waist deep in water. The female prisoners in the Birkenau women's camp worked under the same conditions. I firmly believe that the choice of the construction site, on wet ground, although they could have built on dry and more suitable ground for construction, a choice made by professionals, was designed to exterminate the prisoners who worked in construction and those who would inhabit the buildings. The choice of the swampy terrain was not accidental or the result of logistical limitations. It was a deliberate decision to maximize suffering and death. The first workers were 10,000 Soviet prisoners of war who began labor in the autumn of 1941. Working conditions were appalling, and the mortality rate was especially high during the winter months. The prisoners dug foundations, erected structures, installed systems, all while malnourished, lacking proper equipment, working in freezing water. Only a few hundred. The rest had died building the place designed to kill millions more. Unlike the brick buildings in the main camp, a considerable number of structures in Birkenau were uniform wooden barracks, completely inadequate for human habitation. They lacked an efficient drainage system or insulation against the bitter cold. They were originally designed to house approximately 550 prisoners each, but in practice, many more were crammed inside. The severe overcrowding in the barracks caused indescribable sanitary conditions and led to a high mortality rate among the prisoners who lived in them. A former prisoner recalled, "On rainy days, the compacted earth floor of the barracks turned into a swamp as a result of the lack of drainage. These barracks were originally designed to house 500 people. The construction manager's order to build a third lower tier of bunks increased the capacity of the barracks to 800 to 1,000, and frequently, not 4 but 10 to 12 prisoners lay in each bunk. Imagine that. 12 people sharing a space designed for 4, in structures without adequate heating during winters, where temperatures dropped to minus 20 degrees Celsius, with floors that turned into mud, without proper ventilation, with diseases spreading rapidly in these conditions. This was not carelessness, it was genocide by architectural design. The poisonous gas Zyklon B was used for the first time in the history of Auschwitz on September 3, 1941, to murder a group of 600 Soviet prisoners of war and approximately 250 sick Polish prisoners. The crime was perpetrated in the basements of Block 11. Why that day specifically? What made the SS decide that this was the time to experiment with gas murder? The answers are found in the convergence of several factors. The SS faced the problem of large numbers of Soviet prisoners of war, whom they considered useless for work. Execution methods by firing squad were psychologically difficult for the guards, a grotesque euphemism to describe that even trained killers found it disturbing to look their victims in the eyes while killing them. Hoss sought more efficient mass murder methods. Zyklon B was available. It was routinely used in the camp to fumigate clothing and lice-infested barracks. It was produced by Degeschen, Deutsche Gesellschaft zur Schadlingsbekämpfung, a German company. The crystals were easy to store and transport. Upon contact with air, they released hydrocyanic acid, highly lethal in high concentrations. Hoss ordered the experiment. The 850 selected prisoners were pushed into the sealed cells of the basement of Block 11. The guards, wearing gas masks, poured Zyklon B crystals through openings. The gas was released. The victims died in agony over approximately 20 minutes. Since using Block 11 implied certain inconveniences for the SS, especially the need to relocate the inmates living in the block during the time of the operation, the mortuary next to the crematorium was remodeled as a gas chamber in late September. 4 openings were made in the roof beams of the chamber, over which short chimneys sealed with felt-lined metal covers were built. An SS guard with a gas mask would climb to the roof, remove the covers, open cans of Zyklon B, and pour the contents directly onto the heads of the victims locked below. This gas chamber next to crematorium, one of the main camp, measured approximately 77.5 square meters. Its capacity was limited by the crematorium ovens. Originally, they could burn 200 bodies daily, and after adding a third oven, 340 bodies daily. No, not remotely. In March 1942, a residential house at the edge of the forest in Brzezinka/Birkenau, which had previously belonged to an expelled Polish family, was remodeled as a gas chamber, known as Bunker 1, or Little Red House. The initial works, bricking up windows, breaking holes in the walls to drop Zyklon B, installing powerful doors, were completed approximately on March 23rd, because on that day, several hundred Jews were probably murdered inside. Rudolf Hoss and Adolf Eichmann, the representative of the Reich Main Security Office, in charge of deportations to extermination centres, chose this house together during a visit by Eichmann. According to Hoss, approximately 800 people could be murdered simultaneously in the house. 2 barracks for undressing were built nearby. In mid-1942, a second house of an expelled farmer, also located outside the Birkenau camp fence, was adapted as a gas chamber, known as Bunker 2 or Little White House. Hoss estimated that 1,200 people could be murdered simultaneously there. 3 barracks for undressing were erected nearby. These provisional facilities operated during the most intense period of deportations. The Jews selected for immediate death were led directly from the train station to these little houses. They were told they would shower and be disinfected. The victims, unaware of the dangers, entered. The doors closed. The Zyklon B was introduced. 20 minutes of agony. The bodies were initially buried in massive graves in nearby meadows. But this method soon proved problematic. The groundwater contaminated the area. The smell was unbearable. The swollen bodies began to break the surface of the soil. In September 1942, Hoss ordered the exhumation of all buried corpses and their cremation on enormous open-air pyres. How many people were murdered into these provisional bunkers? Between January 1942 and March 1943, approximately 175,000 Jews were gassed to death there, of which 105,000 were murdered between January and March 1943. But even this massive scale of murder was not enough for the Nazi plans. They needed something bigger, more efficient, more industrial. In August 1942, planning began for the construction of 4 large-scale gassing facilities. The construction of 4 large gas chambers and crematoriums began in Birkenau in 1942. They became operational between March 22nd and June 25th to 26th, 1943. These were not makeshift structures. They were modern industrial facilities, designed and built by professionals. The Topf and Cerner company, located in Erfurt, supplied the modern equipment to incinerate bodies. Topf engineers visited Auschwitz regularly, solved technical problems, supervised installations. Crematoriums 2 and 3 were twins, with identical but inverted designs. The gas chambers and undressing rooms were located underground. The victims descended stairs, entered rooms disguised as bathrooms with showers. The underground gas chambers were presented as bathhouses with showers. You entered from the undressing room. The Zyklon B crystals were dropped through the holes in the ceiling into special wire mesh columns, where the gas was released. To ventilate them more quickly and reduce the time needed to remove the corpses, the chambers were equipped with mechanical ventilation systems. The area of each chamber was 210 square meters. Approximately 2,000 people could be murdered simultaneously in each one. After the gassings, the bodies were transported to the crematorium located at ground level via an electric elevator. Before cremation, gold teeth and any other valuables, rings, jewellery, were extracted from the corpses. Crematoriums 4 and 5 were completely at ground level and were divided into several smaller rooms. Zyklon B was thrown through openings in the walls of the building. Each one could murder approximately 2,000 people simultaneously. According to calculations made by the Zentralbauleitung, Central Construction Office, on June 28, 1943, the crematoriums could burn 4,416 corpses per day, 1,440 each, in crematoria 2 and 3, and 768 each in crematoria 4 and 5. This meant that the crematoriums could burn more than 1.6 million corpses per year. Prisoners assigned to cremation stated that the actual daily capacity of the 4 crematoriums in Birkenau was higher, approximately 8,000 corpses. These are not abstract numbers. Each figure represents a life. Children who would never grow up, parents who would never hug their children again, elderly people whose lives were cut short. And the SS calculated these deaths as if they were industrial production, optimizing efficiency, improving yield. Dr. Charles Bendel, a Jewish doctor prisoner assigned to the Sonderkommando, provided a detailed testimony after liberation. His description offers a terrible window into the daily operation of the crematoriums. The crematorium for Auschwitz is really in Birkenau, and there my job was to medically care for the 900 prisoners who worked in the crematorium. These 900 prisoners were not allowed any contact with other prisoners, because these prisoners knew the darkest secret of the camp. They saw everything: the arrivals, the deceptions, the gassings, the handling of corpses. The SS could not allow this information to leak to the rest of the camp. Dr. Bendel continued, "There were 2 gas chambers, underground, approximately 10 meters long, 5 meters wide, and 1.5 meters high, each one. These 2 gas chambers supplied corpses to crematorium 1 and 2. For crematoria 3 and 4, there were 2 other gas chambers measuring each 6 meters long and 3 meters wide and 1.5 meters high." Notice the technical precision. Exact measurements, as if he were describing warehouses or conference rooms, not places where thousands died daily. In the case of the gas chambers for crematoria 1 and 2, the gas was poured through the roof. In the case of the gas for crematoria 3 and 4, the gas was introduced through small windows in the wall. Dr. Bendel explained that the gas used to murder people was prussic acid, also called Zyklon B. The required amounts: for the 2 large gas chambers connected to crematoria 1 and 2, 2 tins were required for each chamber. For the smaller gas chambers connected to crematoria 3 and 4, 1 tin was required for each chamber. He described the tins: cylindrical with a diameter of 20 to 30 centimeters and approximately 50 centimeters in height. To kill a chamber full of people required 3 to 5 minutes, testified Dr. Bendel. 3 to 5 minutes. The time it takes to read this section. The time of a short song. In that span, 1,000 people died in agony. The gas was delivered to the crematoriums by a Red Cross ambulance, a grotesque perversion of a universally recognized symbol of medical aid. It arrived approximately 5 minutes after a transport of prisoners had arrived for extermination at the crematorium. In the 2 large gas chambers, it was usual to put 1,000 people in each one, and in the 2 small ones 500 people each, Bendel explained. The answer lies in an extraordinary mistake made by the SS. When the Red Army approached in January 1945, the Nazis tried to destroy all evidence of their crimes. They burned camp records, victim lists, transport registers, murder documentation, but they forgot a building, the building where the construction archives were kept. When the Soviets arrived on January 27, 1945, they found hundreds of intact architectural plans, detailed technical drawings showing every structure, every system, every installation, the plans of the gas chambers, the ventilation systems, the crematoriums, all documented with engineering precision. These documents are extraordinary, because from no other extermination camp did so much technical documentation survive. The plans of Auschwitz constitute irrefutable evidence, not only that the genocide occurred, but how it was planned, designed, and executed with bureaucratic meticulousness. The testimony of Dr. Bendel reveals chilling details about the daily operation of the crematoria. In the 2 large gas chambers, it was usual to put 1,000 people in each one, and in the 2 small ones, 500 people each. 1,000 people crammed into an underground space of 210 square meters. Imagine that. The density, the body heat, the claustrophobia even before the gas began to release. Dr. Bendel, who medically cared for the 900 prisoners of the Sonderkommando, explained that these workers were not authorized any contact with other prisoners. The isolation was absolute. No one could know what happened inside the crematoriums. To kill a chamber full of people required 3 to 5 minutes, testified Bendel. 3 to 5 minutes from when the Zyklon B crystals fell until the last groan faded. 20 more minutes for the mechanical ventilation to extract enough gas so the Sonderkommando could enter safely. The gas arrived in a Red Cross ambulance, an obscene perversion of a universally recognized symbol of humanitarian aid. The ambulance arrived approximately 5 minutes after a transport of prisoners had arrived for extermination at the crematorium. Everything timed with industrial precision. The Zyklon B containers were cylindrical, with a diameter of 20 to 30 centimeters, and approximately 50 centimeters high. For crematoria 2 and 3, 2 tins per chamber were required. For crematoria 4 and 5, being smaller, 1 tin per chamber. With 2 tins killing 1,000 people, each victim represented barely a few grams of poisonous crystals. The SS had reduced murder to chemical efficiency calculations. The gas chambers of crematoria 2 and 3 were located underground, disguised as bathhouses with showers. The victims descended stairs from the undressing room. The ceilings of the chambers contained 4 openings, over which short chimneys sealed with felt-lined metal covers were built. An SS guard with a gas mask climbed to the roof, removed the covers, opened the Zyklon B cans, poured the gas crystals through holes in the roof into special wire mesh columns, where the gas was released. Because the Zyklon B crystals needed exposure to air to release the poisonous gas, the wire columns maximized that exposure, accelerating the gassing process. Even the smallest details were optimized for lethal efficiency. The chambers of crematoria 2 and 3 measured approximately 10 meters long, 5 meters wide, and 1.5 meters high. Relatively small spaces where 1,000 people were forced simultaneously. The area of each chamber was 210 square meters, less space than a modest 2-bedroom apartment, containing 1,000 people in their final moments of life. To ventilate them faster and reduce the time needed to remove corpses, the chambers were equipped with mechanical ventilation systems. After each gassing, fans extracted the poison air, venting it outside, allowing the Sonderkommando to enter faster to start the process of extracting bodies, cutting hair, extracting gold teeth, transporting corpses to the electric elevator that took them to the crematorium ovens at ground level. Crematoriums 4 and 5 operated in a slightly different manner. They were completely above ground and divided into several smaller rooms. Zyklon B was thrown through openings in the walls of the building instead of the ceiling. Each one could murder approximately 2,000 people simultaneously. The gas chambers measured approximately 6 meters long, 3 meters wide, and 1.5 meters high. Spaces even smaller than those of crematoria 2 and 3, but multiple chambers allowed processing large quantities of victims. What was the total extermination capacity? According to calculations made by the Zentralbauleitung, the Central Construction Office of the SS, on June 28, 1943, the 4 crematoriums could burn 4,416 corpses per day, 1,440 each in crematoria 2 and 3, and 768 each in crematoria 4 and 5. This meant the crematoriums could burn more than 1.6 million corpses per year. But even these numbers underestimated the actual capacity. Prisoners assigned to cremation, Sonderkommando members doing the work, stated after liberation that the actual daily capacity of the 4 crematoriums in Birkenau was approximately 8,000 corpses. 8,000 people every day, processed through the industrial machinery of death. These systems did not appear spontaneously. They were designed, built, and installed by private German companies competing for lucrative contracts. The Topf und Sahne company from Erfurt supplied the modern equipment to incinerate bodies. Top engineers visited Auschwitz regularly, supervised installations, solved technical problems. When cremation capacity fell short of expectations, the engineers proposed improvements, more efficient ovens, better combustion systems, methods to accelerate the process. Preserved correspondence between Topf und Sahne and the SS shows bureaucratic discussions about costs, delivery times, and technical specifications. In one letter, a Topf engineer refers to the gas chambers simply as special cellars. The euphemistic language hid reality. They were designing facilities for mass murder. Of course. They visited the camp. They saw the smoking chimneys. They smelled the unmistakable odour of burning human flesh. They knew exactly what they were building, and they did it for corporate profit. After the war, some executives of these companies faced trials, but many were never punished. continuing professional careers in post-war Germany, as if their participation in the genocide was simply another engineering project on their resumes. The extermination reached its peak in the spring and summer of 1944, with the deportation of approximately 430,000 Hungarian Jews to the camp and the subsequent murder of the majority of the deportees. Hungary had been an ally of Nazi Germany during most of the war, and the Hungarian government had resisted German demands to deport its Jewish population. But in March 1944, Germany occupied Hungary militarily. Adolf Eichmann arrived in Budapest with a special team to organize the deportations. In less than 2 months, between May and July 1944, the Nazis deported more than 430,000 Hungarian Jews to Auschwitz. Trains arrived constantly, sometimes several a day. The extermination system operated at maximum capacity. During this period, the pressure on the extermination machinery was so great that the Germans reactivated the provisional gas chambers, bunkers 1 and 2, which had stopped operating in the spring of 1943. Bunker 2 was put back into operation in the spring of 1944, specifically for the extermination of the Hungarian Jews. Even with all facilities operating simultaneously, 4 large crematoriums, plus the provisional chambers, the cremation capacity could not keep pace with the gassings. The Nazis resorted again to open-air cremation pyres, burning corpses in enormous bonfires in open pits near the crematoriums. The photographs taken in May to June 1944 by Bernhard Walter and Ernst Hoffmann, SS officers, document this period. The images show the selection ramp, families being separated, lines of people walking towards the crematoriums, black smoke rising from the chimneys, and open-air pyres. These photographs, known as the Auschwitz album, are some of the few direct photographic evidences of the extermination process. The answer remains partially mysterious. Some historians suggest that the photographs were taken as administrative documentation, showing the efficiency of operations to report to superiors in Berlin. Others propose they were intended as internal SS propaganda. What is indisputable is that these images provide irrefutable visual testimony of genocide in action. The members of the Sonderkommando, prisoners forced to work in the gas chambers and crematoriums, faced the cruelest destiny imaginable. They participated directly in the extermination process of their own people. The SS kept them isolated from the rest of the camp because they possessed overly dangerous knowledge, and periodically the SS selected the entire Sonderkommando for the gas chambers, replacing them with new prisoners to maintain the secret. The Sonderkommando members knew they were doomed, but some decided that if they were going to die, they would die fighting. On October the 7th, 1944, approximately 450 members of the Sonderkommando rebelled. They had been accumulating explosives stolen in small quantities from the munitions factory where Jewish female prisoners worked. They had hidden improvised weapons. They had planned the revolt for weeks. That afternoon they attacked the SS guards. They killed several guards with stones, shovels, whatever tool they could use as a weapon. They set fire to Crematorium 4. The building was severely damaged. It would never operate again. The rebellion was the only armed revolt that occurred in Auschwitz. It was quickly crushed. The Nazis brought reinforcements. Most of the rebels were killed in combat or executed immediately afterwards. Some tried to escape, but were captured and publicly hanged as a warning. In terms of immediate survival, no. Almost all participants died, but they permanently destroyed Crematorium 4, reducing the camp's killing capacity, and they proved that even in the most desperate circumstances, resistance was possible. Their bravery is remembered as one of the most extraordinary acts of resistance during the Holocaust. In late 1944, the military collapse of Nazi Germany was increasingly evident. The Red Army advanced from the east. Allied forces had liberated France and were approaching the German border from the west. Defeat was inevitable. On November 26, 1944, Heinrich Himmler, ordered a halt to the extermination of Jews in Auschwitz. The reason was not humanitarian, it was practical. The Nazis wanted to destroy evidence of their crimes before the Allies arrived. The crematoriums ceased to operate. The SS began dismantling the technical equipment of the crematoriums and gas chambers. The ovens were destroyed. The structures were demolished. In January 1945, just before the final evacuation, the Nazis used dynamite to blow up the crematorium buildings, attempting to erase the physical evidence of what had occurred there. But they did not complete the job. When the Red Army arrived on January 27, 1945, most of the Birkenau camp remained intact. The ruins of the crematoriums were still visible. The barracks still stood, and in the separate construction archives building, the complete plans waited to be discovered. November 2008. An apartment in Berlin. During the cleaning of a home, 28 documents appear that will change our understanding of how the genocide was planned. They are original architectural plans of Auschwitz, dated between 1941 and 1943, stamped by the Construction Directorate of the Waffen-SS and the police. The story remains partially mysterious. What we do know is that these documents, drawn at a 1 to 100 scale, show precise details to expand the camp, including a gas chamber measuring 11.66 meters by 11.20 meters. On one of the plans, the German word Gaskammer, gas chamber, clearly appears. Another document is signed with the initials of Heinrich Himmler. These plans are extraordinary because they definitively refute Holocaust deniers. They are not testimonies that can be questioned. They are not photographs that can be interpreted in multiple ways. They are official technical documents demonstrating that the genocide was systematically planned. The German newspaper Bild, which acquired the documents, presented them to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for safekeeping at Yad Vashem in 2010. They are now preserved for posterity, permanent evidence of how professional architects, engineers and designers collaborated in creating the mass murder infrastructure. But these were not the only plans that survived. When the Red Army approached in January 1945, the Nazis tried to destroy all evidence of their crimes. They burned camp archives, victim lists, transport records, murder documentation. But they made an extraordinary mistake. They forgot the building where the construction records were kept. Soviet soldiers found a considerable amount of technical works, among them many of the original construction plans. These documents revealed that the construction of Auschwitz was a project that lasted years, involving multiple companies and thousands of workers, Germans and foreigners. The plans include designs for Crematorium 2 and 3 dated November 1941, sketches of buildings to store corpses, the design of the iconic entrance to the Birkenau camp, plans to expand Auschwitz, one dated April 30th, 1942. They show that every detail was meticulously planned, the exact dimensions of the gas chambers, the ventilation systems calculated to extract poisonous gas rapidly, the location of the crematoriums to maximize efficiency, all documented with the cold precision of any industrial construction project. Herta Sosvinsky, a prisoner who worked as a clerk at the construction authority, would testify after the war. The task of the Bauleitung was the general planning of all construction works within Auschwitz, including housing, medical facilities, crematoria, gas chambers. The Bauleitung was not only responsible for the planning, but also for the work itself, the allocation of materials and supervision. The plans were executed by SS draftsmen, prisoners with technical knowledge employed by the planning offices, and civilian designers. Companies presented projects, they negotiated contracts. Everything followed normal bureaucratic procedures, except that the final product was a machine to exterminate human beings. The first massive gassing inside a concentration camp occurred on a specific date that testimonies have preserved. September 3rd, 1941. The place, Block 11 of Auschwitz. The victims, approximately 600 Soviet prisoners of war. Communist commissars, according to the Gestapo, and 250 sick Polish prisoners. Adam Zakarski, a Polish prisoner, was a witness to that historic and terrible moment. His words describe what he saw: the gas being introduced, the screams gradually dying out, the final silence that confirmed that the experiment had worked. The invasion of the Soviet Union by Germany on June 21, 1941, provoked the surrender of more than 2 million Red Army soldiers. The German leaders decided to exterminate them. The execution methods, by firing squad used by the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing squads, were psychologically difficult for the executors. The SS sought methods that distanced the perpetrators from their victims. Gas had already been used during Operation Euthanasia, T4, where approximately 80,000 people with mental and physical disabilities were eliminated in gas chambers, built in psychiatric centres, between autumn 1939 and August 1941. The method had proven efficient. But in Auschwitz, the SS experimented with something different. Instead of bottled carbon monoxide, used in Operation T4, they tested a pesticide called Zyklon B. Zyklon B was originally developed in Germany in the 1920s as a pesticide to eliminate insect pests. The name means Cyclone B, the second improved version of an earlier compound. The active ingredient is hydrogen cyanide, prussic acid, a poisonous gas that interferes with cellular respiration. At room temperature, it presents as a gas, but to be transported from factories to concentration camps, it had to be absorbed into a solid carrier, wood dust, or diatomaceous earth, mainly silica. The Zyklon B crystals came in cylindrical cans, 20 to 30 centimeters in diameter and approximately 50 centimeters high. When the crystals were exposed to the air, especially warm and humid air, the hydrocyanic acid was released from the solid carrier, forming a lethal gas. The gas rapidly enters the bloodstream through the lungs. Part of the acid transforms into cyanide. The cyanide attacks the cells, especially the mitochondria, the cellular power plants. The cyanide binds to a protein called cytochrome C oxidase, which forms part of the cellular electron transport chain. This protein contains ion groups. The cyanide binds to these ion groups, forming a stable compound. As a result, electrons can no longer be transported properly. The electron transport chain stops. Cells can no longer produce ATP, the energy necessary for all vital processes. Without usable oxygen at the cellular level, even if the lungs keep inhaling air, the cells die. Organs fail, the heart stops. The victim dies from cellular asphyxiation. In an adult human being, death occurs approximately 2 minutes after inhaling 70 milligrams of hydrogen cyanide. In the Auschwitz gas chambers, where concentrations were extremely high and victims were crammed together, raising the temperature and humidity, which accelerated gas release, the process lasted between 3 and 20 minutes, depending on the number of people and Zyklon B used. In ideal conditions, merely 4 grams of Zyklon B per person were required to cause death. This meant that 1 ton of this product could murder 250,000 people. Records show that in 1944, Auschwitz received supplies of 1,175 kilograms of Zyklon B from Dagesh, the manufacturing company. Part was used for legitimate fumigation of clothing and barracks to control lice plagues. The rest was used in the gas chambers. When the pesticide was used for fumigation, it contained an irritant agent, a sort of olfactory alarm that warned workers if they accidentally began to inhale the gas. When the Nazis ordered IG Farben to produce Zyklon B for the gas chambers, they specifically demanded they remove this warning agent. They did not want victims to know what was happening until it was too late. Using the basement of Block 11 for massive gas-ins presented logistical problems. The bunker lacked adequate ventilation, so the SS had to wait a long time before the Sonderkommandos could enter to extract corpses. Additionally, Block 11 was far from the crematorium, complicating the transport of bodies. In late September 1941, the SS converted the mortuary of the crematorium in the main camp into a gas chamber. They drilled 4 holes in the roof and built short chimneys sealed with felt-lined metal covers. An SS guard with a gas mask climbed to the roof, removed the covers, poured Zyklon B crystals through the holes. The new operational gas chamber next to the crematorium offered significant advantages: good ventilation system, capacity for several hundred simultaneous victims, immediate proximity to the crematorium ovens. In September, they conducted a definitive test. 900 Soviet commissars were gassed simultaneously. Rudolf Höss personally supervised the operation. In his memoirs, he would describe clinically, following the introduction of the Zyklon B bags, some cried gas, which was followed by powerful screams and pushes against the doors, but these withstood the pressure. Höss considered the results satisfactory. This gas chamber operated from September 1941 until December 1942. During that period, the SS experimented and perfected their methods. They learned how much Zyklon B was needed, how long to wait before ventilating, how to maximize the efficiency of the process. The killing capacity of the new procedure was such that the crematorium could not keep up with incinerating the corpses, but the SS found solutions to every operational problem. The result was that, barely a year later, Auschwitz began to exterminate tens of thousands of Poles, Romani gypsies, and hundreds of thousands of Jews from all over Europe, from France to Hungary, from Holland to Romania. The victims selected for immediate death were led from the ramp to the crematoriums. The SS officers maintained the fiction until the last possible moment. They told them to shower and disinfect after the long journey on the trains. The families stayed together, believing the words of their captors. Trucks transported those too weak to walk. The rest marched on foot. Upon arriving at the crematoria, the victims had to undress. In crematoria 2 and 3, there were special undressing rooms in the basement. In crematoria 4 and 5, separate barracks served this function. The reason was practical and macabre. The SS wanted to recover all clothing to send to Germany, but it also served a psychological purpose. Naked people are more vulnerable, easier to control, less prone to resist. The guards shouted orders. Leave your clothes neatly. Remember where you put them to recover them after the bath. Tie your shoes together. This attention to seemingly mundane details reinforced the lie. If they were going to die, why would it matter to remember where they left their shoes? After undressing, the victims descended stairs in crematoria 2 and 3, or entered directly at ground level in crematoria 4 and 5, into rooms that looked like bathrooms. The walls were painted. There were hooks to hang towels, instructions in multiple languages about hygiene procedures. In some cases, the SS had even installed fake shower heads on the ceilings, metal objects that looked like sprinklers, but from which water never flowed. The SS ordered the victims to hurry. Fast! The water is getting cold. The others are waiting. They pushed people inside. The guards yelled, beat those who moved slowly. The goal was to cram the largest possible number of people into the smallest space. The fuller the chamber, the faster the asphyxiation. The steel doors were closed. They were sealed hermetically. At that moment, the victims probably began to realize that something was terribly wrong. There was no water. The showers did not work. The space was claustrophobically small. 1,000 people in 210 square meters. The air became suffocating from the heat of so many crammed bodies. Then, through openings in the ceiling, crematoria 2 and 3, or in the walls, crematoria 4 and 5, pale blue crystals fell. Zyklon B. Johann Kremer, an SS doctor who supervised gassings, would testify after the war. The screams of the victims could be heard through the peephole of the door, and it was clear that they fought for their lives. Miklos Niesli, a Hungarian Jewish pathologist and one of the few Sonderkommando survivors, described what the Sonderkommando found when they opened the chambers after gassings. The corpses formed layers. At the bottom, the weakest, elderly children. In the middle, the women. On top, the young and strongest, who in their final moments had desperately tried to climb over others, to reach less poisoned air near the ceiling. The bodies were piled near the doors, the last positions of people trying to escape. Some showed signs of having scratched the concrete walls with their fingernails until they bled, parents hugging their children, couples intertwined, the physical evidence of the most terrible moment imaginable. According to Dr. Charles Bendel, who worked as a prisoner doctor assigned to the Sonderkommando, killing a chamber full of people required 3 to 5 minutes. But that calculation only measured the time from when the Zyklon B was introduced until the screams faded. The complete death process, from inhalation to the total cessation of vital functions, lasted between 15 and 20 minutes. The Zyklon B was poured into perforated pipes from the ceiling. Upon contact with the humid and hot air produced by the crowded people, the crystals released hydrocyanic acid. The gas quickly entered the blood through the lungs. The cyanide attacked the cells, especially the mitochondria, the cellular power plants. The victims first suffered suffocation, then came unconsciousness, brain death, coma, and finally death. It was not instantaneous as some might imagine. It was a growing agony as the poisonous gas blocked the cell's ability to use oxygen. The lungs kept inhaling air, but the cells could not use it. It was cellular asphyxiation. Approximately half an hour after introducing the Zyklon B, the SS activated the mechanical ventilation systems. Powerful fans extracted the poisoned air from the chambers, expelling it outside. This accelerated the process, allowing the Sonderkommando to enter faster to begin the most horrible work imaginable. The members of the Sonderkommando, Jewish prisoners forced to participate in the extermination operations, opened the doors of the gas chambers. The smell was indescribable, a mixture of bitter almonds, the characteristic smell of cyanide, excrement, vomit, blood. Some of the new Sonderkommando members vomited or fainted upon entering for the first time. Their work consisted of separating the intertwined bodies, cutting the hair from the women, which was sold to German textile companies, extracting gold teeth with pliers, which were melted and sent to the German central bank, searching for jewelry or hidden money in body cavities, cleaning the blood, bodily fluids, feces from the walls and floors. The corpses were then transported to the crematorium ovens. In crematoria 2 and 3, an electric elevator took them to the ground level where the ovens were. Each oven could burn several bodies simultaneously. The cremations lasted approximately 20 minutes per batch. The members of the Sonderkommando faced indescribable psychological trauma. They frequently recognized relatives, friends, neighbors among the corpses they had to handle. Some committed suicide. Others became apathetic, detaching themselves emotionally to survive. They all knew they were doomed. The SS periodically selected the entire Sonderkommando for the gas chambers, replacing them with new prisoners who then faced the same fate. Philipp Müller, one of the few Sonderkommando members who survived the war, would write in his memoirs, "We were living corpses. Every day we died a little more. We were no longer humans. We were automatons performing mechanical functions in hell." Despite the devastating conditions, some members of the Sonderkommando performed extraordinary acts of resistance. They buried written testimonies in bottles and metal containers in the ground near the crematoria, messages for the future, evidence of what had happened. Several of these testimonies were found after the war by archaeological excavations at the site. In 1944, some Sonderkommando members managed to take secret photographs of the extermination process. Using a camera smuggled into the camp, they photographed corpses being burned in open-air pyres, victims being led towards the gas chambers. These images, known as the Sonderkommando photographs, are some of the few direct photographic evidences of the extermination operations. They were taken at mortal risk. If the SS had discovered the photographers, they would have been executed immediately. The Sonderkommando knew it was doomed, but some decided that if they were going to die, they would die fighting. For weeks, they had been planning a revolt. They had accumulated explosives, stolen in small quantities, from the Union munitions factory, where Jewish female prisoners worked. They had hidden tools they could use as weapons. They waited for the right moment. On October 7th, 1944, approximately 450 members of the Sonderkommando assigned to crematoria 2 and 4 rebelled. They attacked the SS guards with stones, shovels, metal bars, any object they could use as a weapon. They killed several guards. They set fire to crematorium 4 using the explosives they had accumulated. The building was severely damaged. It would never operate again. Some of the rebels managed to cut the barbed wire and temporarily escape from the camp, but the SS brought reinforcements quickly. They pursued the fugitives with dogs. Most of the rebels were killed in combat or executed immediately after being captured. Some were publicly hanged as a warning. In terms of immediate survival, no. Almost all participants died, but they permanently destroyed crematorium 4, reducing the camp's killing capacity by approximately 1,500 people per day. And they proved that even in the most desperate circumstances, resistance was possible. Their bravery is remembered as one of the most extraordinary acts of resistance during the Holocaust. The 4 Jewish women who had smuggled the explosives, Rosa Robota, Ella Gartner, Estera Weichblum, and Regina Saferstein, were captured, tortured to reveal other conspirators, and finally publicly hanged on January 6, 1945. Rosa Robota shouted, "Revenge," moments before dying. By late 1944, the military collapse of Nazi Germany was inevitable. The Red Army advanced from the east, liberating Soviet territory and approaching Poland. Allied forces had liberated France and Belgium, approaching the German border from the west. On November 26, 1944, Heinrich Himmler ordered a halt to the extermination of Jews in Auschwitz. The crematoria stopped operating. The reason was not humanitarian, it was practical. The Nazis wanted to destroy evidence before the Allies arrived. The SS began to dismantle the technical equipment. The crematorium ovens were destroyed. The structures were systematically demolished. In January 1945, just before the final evacuation, the Nazis used dynamite to blow up the buildings of crematoria 2, 3, and 5, trying to erase the physical evidence of what had happened. The roar of Soviet artillery was heard closer and closer. In mid-January 1945, the Red Army advanced rapidly through Poland, liberating territory after territory. The SS knew the end was near. Auschwitz, that epicenter of industrial genocide, would soon fall into the hands of the Allies. The SS response was brutal and calculated. They decided to evacuate the camp, taking all prisoners who could walk. Those too weak or sick to march would be left behind, presumably to die before the Soviets arrived. On January 17, 1945, the SS began the evacuation. Approximately 60,000 prisoners were beaten out of the barracks. Temperatures hovered around -20 degrees Celsius. Snow covered the ground. The freezing wind penetrated to the bones. The prisoners wore their thin striped uniforms that offered zero protection against the Polish winter. The SS organized them into columns and began to march westward towards Germany, moving away from the Soviet advance. This would become known as the Death Marches, and the name was sadly appropriate. The prisoners marched day and night, with barely any rests. They did not receive adequate food or water. Those who stopped from exhaustion were immediately shot by SS guards. Those who tried to escape received bullets in the back. The corpses remained in the ditches of the roads, marking the route of this final atrocity. A survivor, Primo Levi, the Italian writer, who would later document his experience in If This Is a Man, described the marches. Those who could not keep the pace were beaten to death or simply executed where they fell. The snow was dyed red with their blood. It was a river of death that had stretched for kilometres. Some Polish residents observing these marches tried to help, throwing bread or warm clothes to the prisoners when the guards weren't looking. But the majority of the local population, terrified by the SS, could do nothing more than watch in horror. Exact figures are impossible to determine, but historians estimate that approximately 15,000 prisoners, a quarter of the evacuees, died during the death marches, some by SS bullets, others from freezing. Many simply fell exhausted and never got back up. The marches lasted days, sometimes weeks. The destinations were other concentration camps in Germany, Dachau, Mauthausen, Bergen-Belsen. But those camps were already overcrowded, without resources, collapsing under the weight of tens of thousands of new prisoners. Many of those who survived the marches would die weeks later in those other camps from disease, starvation, or exhaustion. While the columns of evacuees marched west, approximately 7,000 prisoners remained in Auschwitz, those too sick or weak to walk. The SS had left them behind, assuming they would die before the Soviets arrived. Some SS guards remained in the camp until the last moment, blowing up buildings with dynamite, burning documents, trying to erase evidence. But they did not complete the job. On January 27, 1945, at approximately 3 o'clock in the afternoon, soldiers of the 60th Infantry Division of the 1st Ukrainian Front of the Red Army arrived at Auschwitz. Commander Anatoly Shapiro led a reconnaissance unit that was one of the first to enter. The description of Soviet soldier Vasily Petrenko, who participated in the liberation, was engraved in history. I crossed the first barbed wire fence at 5 in the morning. It was dark. In the shadow, I noticed a presence. It was crawling in the mud before me. He turned around and the white of huge, dilated eyes appeared. I was before a living corpse. Behind him, I sensed dozens of other ghosts, movable bones joined by dry, aged skin. The air was unbreathable. There was a smell mixing burnt meat and excrement. We advanced without saying a word. The Soviet soldiers, hardened veterans of years of brutal war on the Eastern Front, were traumatized by what they found. Some cried openly. Others vomited. Many could not believe that human beings were capable of inflicting such suffering on other human beings. They found approximately 7,000 survivors, if they could be called that. They were living skeletons. Many weighed less than 40 kilograms. They were covered in infected sores, infested with lice, suffering from typhus, dysentery, tuberculosis. Some were so weak they could not speak. Others had lost their sanity. Commander Shapiro would remember decades later. We set up some field kitchens and prepared light food. Some of them died when eating. Their stomachs didn't work. Soviet doctors had to feed the survivors with extreme caution. Spoonfuls of watery soup, small pieces of bread. Anything more substantial could kill them. While military doctors attended to the survivors, other Soviet soldiers began to explore the camp. What they found confirmed the worst suspicions about what had happened there. In the warehouses, known among the prisoners as Kanada, they discovered mountains of belongings confiscated from the victims. 348,820 men's suits, 836,255 women's dresses, enormous quantities of shoes, tens of thousands of pairs, 7,000 kilograms of human hair, packed, ready for shipment to German textile factories, thousands of suitcases, each labelled with names and addresses, evidence of the deceit that had instructed victims to mark their belongings to recover them after disinfection, glasses, dental prostheses, crutches, children's toys. Every object represented a life, every suitcase a name, every pair of shoes a person who had walked to their death. The soldiers also found the ruins of the crematoria. The SS had blown up the buildings with dynamite, but the partially destroyed structures still revealed their purpose. The underground gas chambers, the ventilation systems, the crematorium ovens, the rails to transport corpses, everything visible, everything documented. And in a separate building, forgotten in the chaos of the evacuation, hundreds of architectural plans, the complete technical documents of the construction of Auschwitz, diagrams of the gas chambers, specifications of the crematoria, irrefutable evidence that the genocide had been systematically planned and industrially executed. The Soviets brought photographic and film cameras. They filmed everything: the skeletal survivors, the infested barracks, the warehouses full of belongings, the ruins of the crematoria. These images would be fundamental in the Nuremberg trials, irrefutable visual evidence of Nazi crimes. They also began taking testimonies from survivors, those strong enough to speak. The stories were devastating. One survivor, Primo Levi, would later describe that moment of liberation in a complex way. "We felt no joy, we felt no relief. We felt an immense emptiness, an absence of emotion that was almost as terrible as the previous suffering. Because liberation did not return what was lost. The murdered families would not resurrect. The stolen years would not return. The destroyed innocence would not be rebuilt. The survivors faced an uncertain future. Many did not know if any relative had survived, if their home still existed, what they would do with the rest of their lives permanently marked by trauma." In the following weeks, Red Army hospitals attended to 4,500 survivors. Despite the best medical efforts, hundreds died in the days and weeks after liberation, their bodies too debilitated to recover, even with proper medical care. Auschwitz was not the only extermination camp. Treblinka, Sobibor, Belzec, Chelmno, Majdanek all formed part of the Nazi genocidal machinery. But Auschwitz stood out for its industrial scale, its lethal efficiency, its capacity to process and murder thousands of people daily. Of the approximately 1,300,000 people deported to Auschwitz between 1940 and 1945, around 1,100,000 died. The majority, approximately 960,000, were Jews, of whom 865,000 were gassed immediately upon arrival. Also murdered were 74,000 non-Jewish Poles, 21,000 Romani Gypsies, 15,000 Soviet prisoners of war, and thousands more from other groups. But these figures only represent Auschwitz. The complete Holocaust, the final solution, implemented by the Nazis, resulted in the systematic murder of approximately 6 million European Jews. 2/3 of the Jewish population of Europe were exterminated in less than 5 years. The answer is not simple. It requires understanding the convergence of extreme racist ideology, modern technology, efficient bureaucracy, collective moral collapse, and widespread complicity. It requires acknowledging that the Holocaust was not executed solely by a few monsters, but facilitated by thousands of ordinary people: guards, administrators, engineers, architects, businessmen, who chose to participate or look the other way. One of the most terrible ironies of the Holocaust involves Zyklon B, the gas used to murder over 1 million people in Auschwitz. Its origin traces back to Fritz Haber, a German Jewish chemist who won the Nobel Prize in 1918 for developing the Haber-Bosch process to synthesize ammonia, revolutionizing global agriculture. But Haber was also an enthusiastic defender of chemical weapons during the First World War. He developed the chlorine gas used in the Second Battle of Ypres in 1915, which caused 20,000 casualties. His wife, Clara Immerwahr, also a chemist, vehemently opposed this research. In May 1915, hours after a dinner celebrating her husband's achievements on the battlefield, she shot herself with a revolver in the garden of their mansion. After the First World War, Haber founded the German Society for Pest Control, where he developed pesticides based on hydrogen cyanide. One of these products was called Zyklon, originally designed to fumigate clothing and kill disease-carrying insects like typhus. In 1933, when the Nazis came to power, Haber, despite his German patriotism and his services to the nation, was forced into exile due to his Jewish origin. He died in 1934, defeated and exiled. Years later, the chemical conglomerate IG Farben optimized Haber's formula, creating Zyklon B, the most effective version of the pesticide. When the Nazis sought efficient methods of mass murder, they chose Zyklon B. The final paradox: the derivative product of the work of a Jewish scientist was used to murder millions of Jews, including relatives of Haber himself. Science, which should improve life, was perverted to industrialize death. The horror of Auschwitz and the Holocaust played a fundamental role in the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights on December 10, 1948. The international community, confronted with the evidence of what humans could inflict on each other, decided to establish universal standards of human dignity. The preamble of the declaration begins, "Whereas disregard and contempt for human rights have resulted in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind." Those barbarous acts referred directly to the Holocaust. Article 1 declares, "All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights," a direct response to the Nazi ideology that had classified some humans as Untermenschen, subhumans, deserving of extermination.